the end of the day, forensics is a competition, which means we have to assign some sort of scores to competitors in order to be able to determine what awards they're going to win. This is where rank and rate come in. So this video is going to focus on what rank and rate are and how you can use those on your ballot to help us figure out who advances to finals and how students are able to place in that final round. First, let's talk about rank. Rank is the primary measure that we use to determine which students advance to finals. And what rank essentially is how well that student did in the context of your round. In a typical round of forensics competition, you're going to have about 6 performers. Sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the size of the event, but usually around 6. Your ballot will give you a scale, typically 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, for how to rank those performers. You are going to be ranking them in order from best to worst in the round. 1 is the best, 6 is the worst, assuming there are 6 in your round. If there's 5 in your round, only go to 5. But it's a way to rank them, right? So the 1, best in the round. 2, really good, but not quite as good as number 1. 3, not quite as good as number 2, but better than the others. You see how this goes. It's essentially putting them in order of how well you think they performed. So the other thing that we use in competition for scoring is something called rate. Rate is essentially a grade that we're giving students for their performance, and depending on the tournament, that rate will either be a range of 70 to 100 or 1 to 25. In this video, we're going to be using the scale of 70 to 100, but you can also apply these same principles to the 1 to 25 scale. So if you're giving students a rate on a 70 to 100 scale, you'll want to give them a grade that reflects how good their performance was. Now, let me be clear, forensics is not a place where a C, or a score in the 70s, is average. In fact, we typically keep scores above 80 unless there's been something really offensive in that student's performance or they were completely inappropriate, and we want to be able to communicate that to the judge or to the student. So scores in the 70s, rates in the 70s, typically are a red flag that something is egregiously wrong and needs to be addressed. Usually we keep scores above 80 so that we can be really encouraging to students and allow them to focus on the things that they've done well, because these students have all prepared and worked so hard to get these events ready for competition. We want those rates to reflect that. You can use the rate to determine how strong each performance in your round was, not just compared to others in the round, but overall. So whereas with rank, you're limited in using the context of the round to determine their placing, with rate, you're allowed to say, okay, this student was the best in my round, but overall, this round was kind of weak. So maybe my best in the round gets a rate or a grade of a 92. And the worst in the round maybe gets an 80, and the others are somewhere in between. If it's a really awesome round and everybody did a fantastic job and it was so hard for you to give them different ranks because you really thought they were amazing, your rates are probably going to be a lot higher, probably up in the high 90s, maybe starting with 100 or a 99. A performance doesn't have to be perfect to get a 100. You just want to communicate with that rate how incredible that performance was. You can also use rate to note gaps in the quality of performances in the round. So let's say, for example, the student who has a rank of 2 and the student who has a rank of 3 were pretty far apart in terms of quality. So maybe you had 2 in the round who were amazing and the others were way far behind. If that's the case, you can use your rate to communicate that to both the student and the tabulation staff. So your 1 and 2 might have scores in the high 90s, and your 3, 4, 5, 6 may have scores in the 80s. That lets the students and the staff know there's a big gap in this round in terms of quality that you're not able to communicate with rank alone. The way that we use rate is as a tiebreaker. So when there are those kind of gaps in quality, and we end up with a tiebreaker for who advances to finals, the students with the higher overall rate is going to go when we're breaking ties and they have the same rank. So being able to say, yeah, this person gets my 3, but they were not up to par with what really needs to advance to finals can help us in the matter of a tiebreaker determine who advances. You don't need to stress too much about that. Just keep in mind that rank is the order that you think they are in the performance from best to worst. 1 is best, 6 is worse, If you don't have 6 in a round, just go to however many you have. Sometimes that's 4, sometimes that's 5. And then the rate is like a grade. It's a score that you're able to give them to denote the quality of the performance overall. Sometimes, if they're all really good performances, you're going to have those rates kind of bunched together, maybe 96, 95, 94, 93, 92. But sometimes you're going to have big gaps in your rate if there are big gaps in the quality of the performances overall, and that is totally okay. So let's recap how all of this works. Ranks, ordering them from best to worst in the round. 1 is best, 6 is worst. Rate, the higher the better. Think of it like a grade. You have a scale of 70 to 100. Really want to avoid scores in the 70s unless you're trying to communicate there's some sort of serious problem, and be able to use those to communicate the quality of the round to people after the round is over. One really, really important thing to keep in mind when it comes to rank and rate: you cannot have ties. So you can't have the student who gets a 1 in your round and the student who gets a 2 have the same rate of 98. We can't have ties like that. The person who gets the 1 must have a higher rate than the person who gets a 2. And they have to correspond like that. So you can't have someone who gets the 3 in your rank have a higher rate than the person who gets a 2. So no ties, and they have to correspond to the order of rank. If you make a mistake with this, and it happens, don't worry about it. It even happens with seasoned judges. We'll probably catch it at the ballot table, and we'll approach you and ask you to adjust your scores accordingly so that we can avoid having any sort of ties and make sure that those all correspond. Rank and rate are some of the most important things that you put on that ballot. And taking a few minutes after the round to kind of spread things out, look at the performances you've judged, figure out what order they need to go in from best to worst, and then what grade or rate you're going to give them, allows us to understand what it is that you just experienced in terms of the quality of the round and decide which students get to advance based on those numerical values.